You're watching The Experience, Comic Culture and Sales, streaming live daily to Facebook, YouTube, Twitch, and Twitter.
Hey everybody, a lot of big things are going on in the world with the Bob Iger returning and replacing Bob Chapek, and we will talk about all that tomorrow. We're going to have a guest today that I've really been looking forward to talking to, so we're going to get to that in just a second. So let's go ahead and stay tuned for the Dan Wickline Show. Now, you guys have seen this little guy before, right? This is Bloodshot Bear. Well, we are very lucky to have with us today the co-creator of Bloodshot. He's working with Frank Miller Presents on the Ancient Enemies series, and he is writing and editing for a new company called Viz 8, I believe it's called. And he's going to join us right now, Mr. Kevin Van Hook.
Hey, thanks, Dan. Good to have me on here.
Well, good to have you, sir. How are you doing?
Doing pretty good. They've been pretty busy the last few months, but I'm doing well.
It does appear. I've seen quite a bit. Your name popping up on stuff. We've been promoting the hell out of the Frank Miller Presents stuff because we had yesterday where Frank had to cancel, but we had Dan, we had Philip Dan, Joe Prado, and a bunch of others on the show. So it was like, hey, well, the next day we're going to have Kevin, who's writing Ancient Enemies. But
and just to clarify, what Dan's writing the actual Ancient Enemies series, I'm writing the sort of origin stories of the main characters as individual one-shots.
Okay, so you're doing more than just Jin.
Yes.
Okay,
That's the one that's been announced, I guess. But yes.
Breaking news.
I'm telling multiple stories so that we'll get to have an idea of who these characters are, so Dan can kind of focus on the main thrust of Ancient Enemies, and I can tell you where these people came from.
Okay. I had a chance to read Ancient Enemies last night. With it coming out tomorrow, we're going to talk about it on the review show we do later tonight in stores this week. But I'm curious. I know that they announced Jin. So does that character appear in the first issue?
Yes. So I think we're going with the pronunciation of genie, but like a genie in a bottle, but it's spelling it the DJINNI way. He does appear towards the end, I think, of the first issue of Ancient Enemies. We see a character on a cruise ship in a hoodie with long hair, and then he loses the hoodie at a certain point, and you see him surrounded by an energy wave around him. And if you look closely, it's not been super clearly established yet, but his tank top has a sort of a little cartoon genie on it, and you'll see that on the cover of the new cover for issue 1 that's been released now. That it's up on Diamond's Previews World.
Okay. Maybe while we're talking, Jay can find that and show it.
Yeah.
Now, how did you get involved with this project?
Well, Dan and I had known each other for a number of years. So years ago, I had been talking to my friend Jimmy Palmiotti and said, I'm kind of interested in maybe doing comics again. At the time, I was actively writing, directing, producing movies already, and animation as well. But I still always loved comics. And he said, well, let me introduce you to my buddy Dan DiDio. And I was at I believe we were at San Diego Con. I met Dan and I started to explain who I was and what I did. And I got like 4 words out. He said, "Dude, I used to read Bloodshot all the time. It was fantastic. I loved it. And when you cut that chick in half with the ceiling fan in Death Row, that was awesome." And so he had not only read my comics, but he had seen my movies. And so I knew right then I needed to shut up or just screw up any deal I had potentially in the wings anyway. So he was kind enough to say he wanted me to write some comics. I did some Batman stuff. I did Superman and Batman versus Vampires and Werewolves. And I did Lobo and Oracle the Cure. And then he asked me to actually write a book he was editing called Red Tornado. And it was when I did Red Tornado Family, and we introduced 3 other red androids. So there was Red Volcano, Red Inferno, and Red Torpedo. And and that was a great working relationship. And while we never got to actually do another one where he edited me, when he started creating this stuff a couple of years ago, or it started coming online, he reached out and said, "I'm doing this thing with Frank. We can't talk about it yet. It's not fully funded, but would you be interested in coming along?" And I said, I'd love to. And I said, "I have to say this because my ego isn't quite strong enough to not. You know everybody. Why are you asking me instead of some of the more famous, more prominent comic book people that are out there right now?" And he said, "Because I always loved your stuff, and you know more about building universes than a lot of people, and I would really I like to work with people that I like." And that was just a very kind compliment, and I took it. And we've kind of kept it going for probably close to a year and a half until it finally materialized to the point where, okay, we're funded, we're ready to go, and let's do this.
Yeah, like I said, I got a chance to read the first issue of the main series last night, and I was a little surprised at just how grand the scope is on this, because I mean, you don't get a lot of it. I mean, this is kind of Marvel DC type, world building going on. How much of that was, Dan says, "Well, I got this idea." How much was it a collaboration between the two of you building these characters?
It's almost all Dan. I mean, in all fairness, I get the feeling, I never ask him point blank, but I get the feeling that these are characters and ideas he's had floating around for a long time, like years and years. That he wanted to do, if he ever had the chance to do his own stuff. This concept, I think part of it is the inspiration coming out of in a way of you look at 9/11 and the tragedy that happened and how that changed kind of everybody forever on some level or not. And I think that this 9/11 is this tragedy of a spaceship crashing in New York and simultaneously another one crashing elsewhere, and how that impacted the people. And some of them were impacted in ways where they became heroic figures, and some were not. And I think a lot of that is that's all Dan. My contribution really is more so far with Jeannie, as far as building that backstory and helping to create some good world building there in terms of supporting characters and continuity, and us going back and forth on how much we're going to give away now versus how much we're just going to hint at and then tell in the master series of Ancient Enemies later.
Okay. For those of you just joining us, we're talking to Kevin Van Hook, comic writer, film director, producer, so jack of all trades. And we're talking about, right now we're talking about Ancient Enemies, the new series from Frank Miller Presents. That issue 1 goes on sale tomorrow. But Kevin is writing Ancient Enemies Jeannie, which will be out next month.
It comes out in February, actually.
Comes out in February. Okay.
The catalogs.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. The comic schedule thing is always interesting with how much in advance you have to, promote it and get the retailer to buy it 2 months before it ever comes out.
Yeah, we literally it went into Previews World this week, the online version of the catalog this weekend, and I think the physical catalog either ships today or tomorrow. My calendar said the 23rd, but I saw somebody had posted a picture from it about their book, so maybe some stores already have them. But yeah, it's the December issue of Previews World from Diamond, which is showcasing books shipping in February.
Now, I don't know how much of this you'll know, but it seems kind of a weird synergy in the sense that you've got, it's almost like the two universes. It's Frank Miller Presents, but this feels like this is Dan's half of the company, or Dan, Dan building here, where the other book they have coming out is Ronin, which is very much Frank.
I have not had any conversations directly about that, but I have to admit that I get the same vibe. That said, Frank, as far as I know, actually is looking at all the scripts, looking at all the artwork, and working with the artists on layouts and so forth to make these the best books he can that will have his name on them. And I got to meet with both Dan and Frank in Baltimore at Baltimore Comic-Con, and spent a few minutes with Frank. Obviously, as soon as he was there, he was mobbed. But got to spend a few minutes with him, showing some of the stuff I'm doing with the other line. And he got to meet those creators as well, which was really great because they were coming in from Indonesia. And but yeah, it was that seems to be my take as well, that this is kind of Dan's baby. And I think he has the Svengoolie project coming up, which I think is also very much Dan's. And whereas obviously the Sin City Manara book that is going to be coming, that's very much also a Frank book. So I think I think they are bringing their own projects to the table, but at the same time trying to have them work together in a cohesive way.
Now, what's the creative team for the Genie book besides yourself?
I'm actually working with Jose Luis, the artist. Jose and I did his very first comic book work, which was a series called Red Tornado Family Reunion, and that was very cool. And that's the one I mentioned earlier was edited by Dan, so it really is a reunion 13 years later. So that's and Jose was incredibly good then, and he's 10 times better now. He's just a fantastic artist. I'm really excited about working with him again.
I remember the Red Tornado family series because Red Tornado was one of those books or characters that I remember reading as a kid and just kind of really attaching to. So when your series came out, I remember picking it up and seeing the different variations of Red, and just remembering that as a very positive series.
Thanks. No, I've gotten a lot of great feedback over the years. I'm very fortunate. There's two things I did specifically in that era with Dan and DC, which was Red Tornado Family Reunion and Oracle the Cure, that I still get email. I did get tweets until I left Twitter a few weeks ago, but I still get emails and messages and things from fans about those two particular books, and it's over a dozen years now. But they were reprinted in trade paperback, which was very cool.
You said you left Twitter. Have you gone with the mass move over to Hive?
I have not. I have not done anything yet. I wasn't planning on it. Although I have a lot of friends who've made that move to Hive. In the early days of a month ago, I was seeing people going to Mastodon, but in the last week, I have to say, 10 days, I see a huge exodus towards Hive. So as long as Jeff Bezos doesn't try to buy that and compete, I think that it'll probably be successful.
From what I understand, Hive is just two people running the company, so that should be interesting.
Yeah.
I mean,
I wonder. Well, they might have just two people left at Twitter. So I wonder how. I wonder how well it'll do. Obviously, the way it's growing, just colloquial, information that I have, it's very circumstantial, but I probably have seen 50 people post that they went to Hive in the last 2 days. So
same. Yeah, I made the jump over there, and I tried to make the jump to Mastodon. I think the difference is that Mastodon is a very confusing setup where you have multiple servers, and where Hive, it's app only, but you sign up and it feels like Twitter.
Yeah.
There's a lot of similarity.
I haven't looked at either, but I've read that Mastodon was confusing, and specifically people talking about the multiple servers.
Yeah. So, all right, let's go ahead and take our first break, and when we come back, let's talk about, is it Viziate? All
Yep.
right.
Busy.
So we'll focus on Viziate and your trip to Indonesia.
Sounds good.
So we'll be right back.
Thanks for tuning into The Experience. Help us out and hit subscribe over on YouTube and click the bell when you do. Need some help? Scan the QR code in the bottom corner. Who would win, Batman or Superman? It's the age-old debate, except it's so much more complicated than that. Nerd Killer Warfare every week on The Experience is your chance to debate other nerds in the questions we've all been asking for years, except we take those debates and turn them up to 11. Go to bit.ly/EXP casting or scan the QR code to be part of the show.
Everybody, welcome back to the Dan Wickline Show here on The Experience. This is the cover for the Genie, the upcoming comic this February from Kevin and Jose Luis, part of the Frank Miller Presents. So you can check your Diamond catalogs for this. But that's not all you've got in the Diamond catalogs, right?
That's right. And I should just say this real quick, because Dan is so heavily involved in Ancient Enemies, even Genie is really Dan and me. I've seen me listed some places solo as the writer, but it really is Dan bringing a lot to that. As far as Viziate is concerned, brand new company out of Jakarta, Indonesia. They been working with them for about a year and a half, 2 years, trying to square away what we would want to do together. They were primarily at the time an animation and visual effects company, and I'm a visual effects supervisor, and I've also produced animation and live action. And we started off as friends online, and then started working together to develop some stuff. And because of my background, it made a lot of sense to try to develop comic books together. And we began that in earnest a little over a year ago, and then this last July, they came over from Jakarta and set up a San Diego Comic-Con and gave away samplers. We printed up samplers that contained 5 to 10 pages of each of our new titles that we're doing, and printed up some really beautiful posters and gave all that stuff away for free to fans and any retailers that stopped by and so on. And met with Diamond, and a couple of weeks later signed a distribution deal with Diamond. They were very impressed with what all we had to offer, and the fact we have an actual 10-year plan and good-looking material. So very, very excited.
So what is the theme for Viziate?
Primarily, most of the titles, in broad strokes, there is a root in Southeast Asian lore, mythology, storytelling. So and primarily Indonesia. I was somebody who, while I know pretty fair amount about Egypt's history and Greek's history and mythology and Roman mythology and history and even Japanese stuff, knew nothing really about Southeast Asia. And I was floored when I found out that Indonesia has 270 million people. Had no idea it was that big. And I find a lot of people I talk to are the same way as I was, that just didn't come up, didn't realize it was that big. Massive country, many islands, traveling east or west to east. I got to visit there in late August and through the month of September, and visited many places. I mean, 6 weeks is a long time, and so we got to see a lot of great stuff. I'm doing research for some of the books because some of my titles deal with different time periods, and so I was looking at Hindu temples and Buddhist temples and ancient mosques and various things that go back over 1,000 years, and it's pretty exciting to see all that stuff and see it in person. And the largest Buddhist temple complex in the world is there, called Borobudur, and it's a very beautiful place. A lot of really stunning, as I say, stunning temples and things like that to see, a lot of historical stuff. Got to visit an Indonesian early king's palace in Sumatra, which is very cool. And but yeah, I was my hosts were Farid Siddiq and I made the bulk of the trip together. Farid is the business development guy, and very knowledgeable and very just a genuinely good guy, very friendly guy, smart man. And he planned a very detailed itinerary. And then Ryan Laksamana, who's the CEO, another great guy, he's a creator of some of this work as well. And I essentially ran around with those two guys, flying half a dozen times, because it's such a big country that to go from one major city to another, it's still going to be a 2 or 3 hour flight. And which, again, I had no perspective on that. So I kind of thought it's like, well, we can drive everywhere, right? It's like an island. It's like, no, it's like a whole bunch of islands. And no, you can't. And so it was, but we ended up in Bali and had a big conference with the financial backer who owns many companies that are, he would like to see them collaborate and work together, and this being one of them. That wide variety of companies, mostly having to do with ecologically minded businesses, things like coming up with sustainable energy, fuel, and so forth that doesn't pollute as much as our existing fossil fuels. And working with this one group in particular, I found interesting, is working with a motorcycle manufacturer to create swappable batteries for their electric vehicles. And it's a setup where you go to a gas station and just pay in advance. Everything's done on your phone, and you swap your battery out. Now you've got a fully charged one. You're on your way. And they say 9 seconds, but let's call it 30 seconds. And when they first said that, I thought, well, that's pretty cool. I'm guessing maybe they've got a few hundred stations already rolling, because they say they're in the early stages. They have 10,000 already in existence. So this is a really serious endeavor. And all the companies were just really well thought out, very smart people doing lots of really cool stuff. And then us doing entertainment, which is something I love, but it feels like a different kind of animal.
Yeah, I was gonna say, I don't quite see how the battery guys in the comic company make.
Well, they ultimately, one of the goals of Viziate is to create a theme park. The land is already there, and a lot of what we're doing is creating the IPs to develop for that theme park, and it will be able to be used, be created in an area utilizing employees from some of the companies that are sort of have a planned obsolescence, like a coal mining company that won't be able to mine coal in these regions in 10 years, just because of there won't be any left, or there won't be permissions and contracts available from the government for that area, or what have you, what they call concessions. And the financial backer is wanting to make sure those people don't just are jobless. So he's looking forward at building employment for a lot of these people. It sounds funny to say, or in a way, because we're all a little jaded, but really good people with really good intentions, and they seem to be in it for the long haul. Hopefully our numbers on the comics will justify that faith, and we'll be able to do that. It's comic book industry is a tough business, but right now we're coming out with 2 titles in February. The first one is Kara, Guardian of the Realms, which is written and drawn by a woman named Triandika Anjani, and it's very cute, very well crafted, about a little girl who's the last human being in sort of an enchanted land, and she takes care of the animals and fantastic creatures we see. And suddenly 2 young men arrive in the land, in the forest, and they're causing trouble, and she has to figure out why. And then the other one is Changelings, which is a book I'm writing that's being drawn by a guy named Ramat Handoko, and we have a colorist named Sakti Uono. And Sakti is bringing more than a colorist usually does, in a sense that they're both fantastic. But so you've got this incredible line art by Ramat that then just becomes paintings through Sakti's work. Sakti's also coloring another title we have upcoming. But Changelings deals with a human child and a demon child swapped at birth. And we say that every now and then this happens throughout history, and that inevitably the human child ends up being the jerk that's trying to destroy the world, and the demon becomes the Earth's savior. And sometimes the savior loses. And so we show little snippets throughout history, and one of them being when we had a major volcano erupt that sent Earth into 40,000 years of nuclear winter. And that was one of the times we lost. But this one is, so one of the fun things about it, when I mentioned doing stuff with history, is I'm doing little flashbacks where we see 100 years ago, a few thousand years ago, 70,000 years ago. But we're seeing moments with these 2 rivals that from their own time period. But they're the ones we have today are more or less the same souls, so to speak. We don't really use soul in the Southeast Asian mythology, but that's what it boils down to. Yeah. So our character, our main character, the demon child, he remembers all of his past lives, and he remembers all of these things that have happened, and that gives him a leg up on the human child, who doesn't have any recollection that she has failed the same way before. And so it's fun. It's I'm getting to do the human child is plaguing the earth with monsters. So the first issue is a kaiju, so it's a great big giant monster coming out of the ocean. We've got dragons, Chinese style dragons, which we don't get to really see a whole lot of. And we typically think of dragons being like the Game of Thrones or Lord of the Rings Hobbit type European fairy tale dragon. But this is fun. We've got a volcanic man, and so there's these different creatures that she's plaguing the earth with, and so we get to do monster stories too.
Well, I really like this idea because I'd say within just in the last 6 months, when Miss Marvel was on the air, one of the things that they brought up was the partition, which I consider myself a pretty good, student of history and stuff like that, but knew nothing about it.
Yeah.
Hadn't even heard of it.
No, the same.
So I started looking into it and just realized just how devoid of the Southeast Asian culture we are in the U.S. from how we teach it and stuff like that. Things, you would think something like the partition would have been taught in history class at some point, and nothing.
Well, I until I was really there, I didn't fully grasp how long the Dutch had colonized Indonesia. That Japan held it for 3 years during World War II, and then essentially when the atomic bombs were detonated, they sort of gave up everything and just sort of walked away. And then the Dutch tried to come back and said, well, we're back. And Indonesia was like, no, we're our own country and we're independent and we're not letting you take us back over. And so lots of interesting things like that. And the fact that the Ottoman or the Muslim people came in as long ago as they did, which is, I believe, and it's I've got a lot of dates floating in my head, but I believe in the 800s AD, and 95% or so of the country is Muslim, and it seems to be a very peaceful coexistence with the non-Muslim neighbors. Bali is very Hindu, but there's a lot of places that are Buddhist as well. So it's just interesting to see.
All right. Now, you said you traveled all through that area.
Mhm.
What were some of the biggest, well, besides the number of people and stuff, just from a cultural standpoint, what were the things that stood out to you?
Some very superficial things stood out to me, which was, I mentioned the electronic vehicle with the motorcycle reference a while ago. I've never seen so many motorcycles in my life, and so just going down the street in Jakarta, which is a massive city. It's one of the largest cities in the world. There are thousands upon thousands of motorcycles on the road with you at any given time, and from my Western eyes, even though I live and drive in LA, which is not known for really easy traffic, it was some of the craziest traffic and craziest driving I've ever seen in my life. And I've also been in Cairo, which also is jam packed. But this was ended up saying a lot was, if there was 5 feet of empty space between you and the car in front of you, it would only be empty for about a second and a half before 2 motorcycles filled that space, and diagonally, sideways, whatever they had to do, but they were occupying that empty space. So that was one thing. I was also fascinated by how similar the rural areas in terms of the roads and the buildings and structures and so forth looked to each other, considering I might be 2,000 miles away. And I know that that's true also here in the U.S., that you'd have country farmhouses look fairly similar to ones in Kansas or North Carolina or something. But in many cases, these felt like literally you could just pick someone up, drop them off 1,000 miles away, 1,500 miles away, and they would think they're in the same place. It was just amazing to me how similar they looked. Probably the most fascinating thing I saw the entire time I was there was visiting with the Tona Toraja people. And the Tona Toraja people have such a feeling and connection with their dead that they feel that it's very important to give them a proper send-off, and they do this by sacrificing animals. And so if you're an important man, your relatives might sacrifice 24 water buffalo in your honor, and that might cost $30,000, $40,000, $50,000. It can be very expensive. And so because it's expensive and people don't always die on schedule, a lot of these families will have the dead embalmed, and then they basically are kept in the house with them for 5 to 7 years while they're saving up the money. So they literally have their own room, and they're called the sick man. Whether it's a grandma or grandpa, it doesn't matter. They're the sick man. And they don't bury in the ground because that could corrupt the earth and their crops. So they inter people in sides of cliffs in man-made caves, and they build these little maquette mannequins called Tao figurines and Tao, and they sort of stand guard to represent the dead at the front. So just fascinating people, and these people are Christian. I actually thought they would have been some other religion, but they are a Christian group that have this belief on the island of Sulawesi. And every year, I believe it's every year, in August, they do a ceremony where they bring out their dead and dress them up and give them new clothes, and maybe give them a cigarette and a little something to eat, and then put them back in. So it's just fascinating. Compared to our culture and way of life, it's just a completely different way of looking at it.
How much do you think, I mean, you went there to learn the culture and stuff. how much of that do you think will inform your writing? Do you think you'll take some of those things and purposely find ways to put it in?
I already have.
Yeah.
I've already have. I've already written. What have I done? I've written 3 comics since I left, 3 scripts, and there's something in each one of them. Because I'm also writing a title called The Seventh Tiger. It won't come out until later next year. We're still debating on whether or not we're going to. The plan had been for us to do 2 more titles in April and then 2 more in June. We may delay those a little bit. Our financier wants to really kind of get a better handle on seeing where all the stories are going and so forth, and he likes to see everything at once. So we'll see how that plays out. But Seventh Tiger in particular, drawn by a guy named Andre Sirgar, again, just a brilliant artist, and we're lucky enough to have Sakta Yuwono color it as well. And Andre is telling the story with me about a group of immortals who have been around about the last 1,000 years. They're all heavily involved in the criminal underworld in Southeast Asia and Asia in general. One oddball character being a Viking or a Nordic guy, and he hasn't been seen for a long time because of some events that happened in the first issue. But right off the bat in the first issue, another one of the characters is murdered and his heart torn out, and we learn that that somebody's able to kill the immortals, and so they're all suddenly ill at ease because they've had this uneasy alliance for all this time, and now someone's figured out how to kill them, and they're pointing fingers at each other. But through the story, I'm able to go back and show scenes with each of these characters anytime over the last 1,000 years. So I've got one of them set up. There's a sequence at that king's palace that I mentioned in Sumatra that in real life was burnt down in 1804, and the king imprisoned in 1813. In my fictionalized version, one of my characters was responsible for the burning of that palace. And in real life, it's just an interesting thing. The Dutch were being fairly lax. They were kind of encouraging hedonism, and there was a lot of partying, a lot of relaxed mores in the area, and the sort of ultra-conservative right-wing Turks and Middle Eastern, I say Turks, it was really Middle Eastern, maybe even Saudis, come in and say, no, you need to be good people and follow the laws and so forth, or we're going to kill you. And they ended up burning the palace to the ground and taking over. But in my story, she's the ultimate manipulator. It's a character named Lestari, and she's sort of behind the scenes pulling the strings throughout the last 1,000 years in a lot of political movements.
Now it sounds like you're tapping into the creative talents of that area, the Southeast Asian.
Absolutely, all of our artists are locals, and some of the writing too. But it's but all of the art so far is coming from Southeast Asia.
Now, are you mixing up the writing to try to get more of a worldly, global feel, or?
So essentially, originally it was, I can't change the fact that I'm not Southeast Asian. So if I'm going to write with you guys, I am who I am. But also, and probably more important than that, is the fact that I have somewhat of a following in Western comics. There are people who do know my work, and I have a track record of creating successful comics. And let's utilize that, and let's try to use my career as something to help open the door for them. And that's what we did in Baltimore Comic-Con. We did the Diamond Retailer Summit, and so we did a presentation. We got to meet with a couple hundred retailers, and then quite a few fans during the actual Baltimore Comic-Con the next couple of days, and it was great to do that. It's some people are too young to really have read a whole lot of my work. Some people have gone back and discovered it because of the Bloodshot movie and that kind of thing. But the older people who did know it, they were more particularly open to checking out this new material because of my attachment. And everybody has loved the artwork. We did a variant specialty cover for Changelings 1 with Christopher Shy. Chris is just a brilliant artist. He's I believe he was the art director for Electronic Arts. He does lots of movie posters, DVD covers. He did the Mandy poster, if you ever saw the movie poster for that. Lots and lots of great stuff. And we've been friends for a number of years. And I brought him in to do this one. And just did a gorgeous job.
Now, you're not just writing, you're also, is it an executive editor? Or
Yeah, we chose executive editor because it's I don't know why. It's people don't seem to use editor-in-chief anymore, but it's basically my contract with the company is I'm a creative consultant, and all that entails. So I helped push them into, this is how you set up a table at a comic book convention. This is how you I helped create the banners for them for the convention and the presence there. Set them up with a printer, which we're printing through Avenue 4, which is a great comics printer who does lots and lots of mainstream books and has a relationship with Diamond, so we can get our books to the Diamond warehouses without paying exorbitant shipping fees, and all those kinds of things, advertising, getting the word out in terms of PR and marketing and so forth. But I also oversee, look at the books, lots of really great talent there. Sometimes I don't speak multiple languages. I speak a little bit of Spanish, and I mean un poquito, just a tiny little bit. But so my hat's off to these people who speak pretty much fluent English, but inevitably they're dealing with a language where tense is used differently, masculine and feminine is used differently. They don't use multiple pronouns for a person. It's not he and she. It's just one. They just picked one, which may be the way we go eventually. I don't know. But it's so as an editor, when I say editor, I'm not really messing with their stories as much as I'm messing with a little bit of grammar here and there and that kind of stuff, and also encouraging as much as I can the craft of storytelling. In terms of one of the big things that I'm always talking about with people is leading the eye through a page, but I would do that with people here. It's not just them, and it's getting people to understand that if we break a panel with some foot or arm or something that goes down in this way, but we're still supposed to go over here, the reader is now confused. Do I jump over here and then do that, or do I come down here and go up? And it's wonderful to break the rules when you know them.
Yeah,
you can do it successfully. Neil Adams was good at it. Lots and lots of people are, but it takes some experience to understand, okay, is this still read? And the same thing with lettering and just the rules of lettering. That I was involved in some of the creation of the very first digital fonts and first digital coloring in comics over 30 years ago. And so I studied a lot of that stuff. And as an editor in comics, I was somebody that worked with and learned from people like Jim Shooter and Bob Layton and Barry Windsor Smith, and I have very strong opinions about those crafts and respect them a lot. So we're getting them up to speed on that. They're doing a great job with it, and I'm sending them every tip I can find from places like Blambot. So it's not just me telling them these things. It's now you're seeing somebody's put together a web page saying the same stuff I've been saying. Yeah. So that's all good stuff.
Yeah, I remember early on when I first started getting into comics and was started as trying to be a publisher. I got a good lesson from Robin Spihar, an old letterer, who explained to me the backwards S and the whole guiding the reader's eye and how it all the different parts have to work together. And so, and it's amazing to me how many newer creators no idea of any of that stuff.
Well, one of the interesting things, and I won't drag out this topic, but when I was at DC writing a bunch of stuff, there'd been a dozen years since I'd been active in comics at that time. And I was kind of amazed when Dan and my editor and the editor of the group, essentially I had asked some questions, and the resulting answer was more or less, even from some of the people that they were referring to, was more about storytelling than most of our staff. So just go with your gut. And it's so I was doing things like in Oracle the Cure, where I opened up with a cutaway of a tenement apartment building with each panel representing a different floor. Mm-hmm. and the top panel being in the attic where there's a silhouetted figure doing something. You can't quite make out what, and then I'm running dialogue down the side. There's an answering machine that's being recapped, and then on each floor, basically they're complaining about the electricity being out. You're playing your video game too much. You blew it with your hairdryer. What's the matter with you? Are you stupid? It's this very New York kind of argument amongst these people, and then you get to the punchline, which is you turn the page, and Oracle is sitting there in her wheelchair with all these cables she's pulled out of the wall, and she's rewiring to be able to retrofit this building to handle her computers. And to me, it was just a very logical way to tell it. But I got a lot of great feedback from the editors about, we just don't see stuff like this. This is really cool. So I want to do as much of that kind of thing as I can with the Viziate stuff, Ancient Enemies books and things. Dan is very much into wanting to do different type of storytelling, just very clear, straight storytelling, nothing really different in the way that I'm talking about it, nothing cinematic. And that's great. It's great to be able to walk in both worlds.
Okay. We need to take a quick break. We will come back and finish our conversation with Kevin Van Hook. Be right back.
There's something for every imagination at your local comic shop. Visit comicshoplocator.com to find a store near you.
Imagine being at a convention and going to an interview panel that's just for you. No bustling crowds, no hours-long lines, just you, the moderator, and your favorite comic book creators. Well, this is pretty much that. Miss Jen sits down every week with 2 comic book creators for a live stream interview about their latest work, and you can ask them whatever you want. It's Talking Shop, Mondays at 5 Eastern on The Experience, Comic Culture and Sales.
Did you know that every Experience show, including some exclusive content, streams on Twitch? Check it out, twitch.tv/the_EXP. Or just scan that QR code.
Hey everybody, welcome back to the Dan Wickline Show here on The Experience. Remember to stick around later on. We've got both Minute to Skim It and In Stores this week, where we'll be doing comic reviews for books coming out tomorrow. Minute to Skim It with Miss Jen will be at 7 o'clock Eastern, and In Stores this week will be at 8 o'clock Eastern. All right, I want to do one more question on Viziate. And Jay just put the link to Viziate in the chat so you guys can check out the art and upcoming stuff. You talked about how there's a land to build a theme park. Is this a cohesive universe they're building? Will these books be tied together, or are these just going to be individuals?
In my original vision, they would have been a cohesive, tied together theme park or universe. That said, fairly early on, we had some unique titles become available to us that were created by Indonesian talent that don't really fit into the universe, and so we are going with the fact that some of the titles will be interconnected. So we have a book called Nusantara Falls, which is created by Ryan Laksamana, who's the CEO. And it's really its own world. And he wants to keep it that way. We have a book called Galeo, the Seawalkers, again, very much its own world. So it'd be kind of hard to tie. It's easy for me to tie mine together, and it's easy for me to even come up with a way to inject my characters into some of the other ones in some fashion. But essentially, right now, it's probably more like 50-50. So.
Okay. And those will be coming out in February, you said, with the
Titles, which are Kara, Guardian of the Realms, and Changelings, will be February.
okay.
So that means, just since if you don't mind me doing a more on the nose plug,
Please.
it's catalog shipping from Diamond that should be in people's hands tomorrow. The previews world is live now. Orders will be due like third week of December, just before Christmas, and that's for the titles that will be coming out in February.
Mhm.
So if people are interested and would like to check them out, and we would love them to, and you can see there are sample pages up online. There's different things. Comic book. I see Bleeding Cool just did they released our sampler, although the pages are out of order. I'm not sure if that's going to end up getting fixed or not, but we pointed it out. But people can check out the artwork and a little bit of the story there as well. But ideally, people would let the retailers know, that their local comic shop, hey, this looks good. And I think Diamond is giving us a spotlight on Kara, and we're also a full page ad and a vertical half page ad in the book.
So when you guys get your catalogs, Kara, Guardians of the Universe,
Guardian of the Realms,
Guardian of the Realms, Changelings, both from Vizi 8, and Ancient Enemies Genie from Frank Miller Presents. So check those off, get them. Mark Pikus had a question for you.
Uh-huh.
He said he watched you the other day on Miss Jen's show, and he wants to know, what comic do you enjoy signing the most? And prior to Valiant, what work do you consider your origin comic?
Okay, so as far as what do I enjoy signing the most? Is that what the question was?
Yeah.
I enjoy signing anything anybody wants to have me sign. I wrote a series called The Visitor back in my Valiant days. I created that character originally with Brian Hitch, and then we did a 2-part story called The Visitor versus the Valiant Universe, and then we did an ongoing series for 13 issues with John Ross and Bernard Chang alternating artwork. Had some Bart Sears covers, had a Mike Leake issue in there. The Visitor is probably, for years, was probably my favorite comic book I had written, because it's really smart. It wasn't our biggest seller, but it came out right as the comic book market was crashing. We didn't really understand that it was crashing, but it was the whole era when Marvel had bought a distributor and their own printer, and another one of those eras of chaos in the comic book industry. But I'm very proud of that work a lot. So when someone brings that up, I get a kick out of signing that. The Bloodshot Zero is something I wrote and drew. It's the only comic book I wrote and drew for Valiant. Inked by Dick Giordano, Casada chromium cover. So I get a kick out of signing that one, just because I didn't just write it, I wrote and drew. And as far as my origin story, do you think the question means what's my first work, or what do you?
Yeah, I think he needs your first work.
Well, so I started in comics when I was 17, and the first few years, companies either went out of business or changed publishing plans or something. So my work didn't come out for a while. So really, it wasn't until around Marvel Presents 21 that came out from Marvel, and I believe that came out in '88. I know I drew it in '88. That I drew a Thing story that was kind of the first thing where I felt like, okay, I'm really here. But before that, really was my book that was really me was Jack Frost in 1986, and I think it was just, I believe the way they cover dated was December '86, January of '87, and it was from Amazing Comics, and it was my own character. It was a sort of a action character, mercenary, sort of like John Sable, but he in that storyline, he had to stop his best friend who had been turned into a vampire. And so that's probably the one I was most heavily associated with and associated myself with until Bloodshot.
All right, we are just about at the end of the show, but I wanted to give you a chance if there was anything else you wanted to mention or plug, any movies you got coming up.
Most of I spent quite a bit of time over the last few years writing pilots that are circulating now for TV series. So very typically dark action adventure. There's one that deals with a supernatural overtone, but the rest are pretty straight. But nothing I can really plug about them yet, other than they're getting attention. Paramount has read them and really liked them, liked my writing a lot. The Greg Berlanti's company, who does a lot of stuff did a lot of stuff for CW and was behind things like Free Guy and stuff. Same kind of reaction. So we're talking about maybe me writing something. We'll see. But there's a lot, and there's renewed interest on a project that I was raising money for some years ago that it was kind of my white whale. I kept going after it, and then some element would fall apart, called Jason and the Necronauts, which deals with the Jason of Greek mythology, who is now 10 years after Jason and the Argonauts story, has been challenged to a battle to the death by Ares, the god of war. No living man has ever been able to defeat a god, and so he journeys to Hades and recruits a crew of the dead. And so that's something I'm very excited about. Casper Van Dien has been cast in it. Mark Dacascos was cast in it, and so we had a lot of traction for a while. And then unfortunately, we were racing the home entertainment or DVD market sliding. So we would begin at a certain point where we knew we had $300,000 coming from X territory, get everything else together, and then come back, and that $300,000 is now $250,000. We did that a number of times where, like to the point where like South Korea went from being good for a couple of $100,000 to being good for like $25,000, that kind of thing.
You ever think about doing it as a comic, just as a proof of concept?
Talked about it, and there's always value in it, but never progressed much. I did a page I'll share with you sometime, but just for my own grins and kicks, but never really proceeded with it. That was one of the things we talked about with Viziate early on, and then we were talking more about the Southeast Asian component, Indonesian history and mythology and so forth. But there's now interest again in turning this into a TV series and maybe fast tracking it. And the Viziate guys have their hands in a lot of stuff. I try to largely stay focused on what they're doing with the comics, but they're involved in things like AR walls for shooting film and TV and so forth, and working very closely with film commissions in Indonesia and the government. So there's a lot of potential there. I wish they weren't 10,000 miles away, because it would be a lot easier for me to just go, okay, let's shoot. But it's a bit of a trip. So
cool. All right, we got to wrap that up there. Thank you for joining us today. This was a lot of fun.
Thanks for having me.
Oh, yeah. So viewers, when you get your catalog, check out Viziate, check out Frank Miller Presents, look for Kevin's stuff. Just buy all the stuff from Viziate. You'll love it. So, and we will see you guys tomorrow, where we're going to talk about the Andor season finale and the Bob Chapek, Bob Iger stuff. So we'll see you tomorrow. Have a great evening and take care.
Sounds great. Thanks.
Join the party. Head over to our link tree to find all the links for everywhere the experience is all the time.